Thank you very much. I want to thank Lisa Torre, one of my students, who invited me to give this text talk, and the TEDx committee from Con College. So it's a pleasure to be here. And this is my first talk, my first TED talk. So um, I want to talk about my life and what I did during the pandemic, and how my life prepared me to deal with this uh, situation. So when um, I was on my sabbatical last year, and I wasn't sure how I'm going to face having to give my lectures on Zoom, and how to learn how to deal with Zoom. In fact, most of my courses, I'd like to take students to the arboretum or outside, and it was a challenge. Here in this photograph, last fall, I started to have my department meeting in botany outside my garden, sitting on my tree stands. In fact, I enjoy to be outside on that meeting. It's probably my best meeting. So, and in fact, uh, teaching in my home on Zoom was not that hard. In fact, I adapted very easily. And my philosophy is to work hard and play hard. So, and you can see in the photo below. This is a panoramic and selfie, which my friends, even dog, call it Manuelfis. Uh, and you can see in my backyard, I built a big fire pit to keep my friends at social distance. In fact, last fall, I was able to do one of my courses, the Ethnobotany Southern New England Botany 311, and most of the classes were in the Arbor. In fact, I can see the students were very happy, enjoy that very much, and probably, unfortunately, make my courses very popular. So, um, in fact, in the past, like in one of the courses I taught was a botany course on how plants shoot projectiles. It's about technology, history of archery, and I taught them how to make bows and arrows and shoot them. So, looking back when I was your age at college, this photograph of my first garden in the backyard of one house in Berkeley. I was a student at UC Berkeley, and I really liked to touch the earth, and really was really soothing and therapeutic to be able to plant my garden, weed it, and harvest my own products. So, in fact, this garden was overgrown originally, so I cut the trees and I used the wood for fences. So it looked like a third world nation. In fact, some of my colleagues say Manuel's a little Appalachian. So, in fact, I continued my gardening when I was at here at New London, at Con College. And you can see I have 9 beds, and this year I'll add 3 more beds in my garden. And the other thing is I want to show this picture is because I have my dog Oscar, and I noticed that a lot of people are adopting dogs, like Eric did too. So during the pandemic, and it forced me to walk 1 or 2 hours a day outside. So in my garden, I start producing different things. Like I love garlic, and last year I was able to harvest 143 garlic heads, and this year I planted 200. So I also grew hops for my beer, which is a lot of work, but it's a pleasure to get hops when it costs $5 an ounce. I got about almost 2 pounds last year, including also other plants like this trumpet squash. You can see in the picture. And also, I've been brewing beer. In fact, I started brewing beer when I was here at Conn College in my first year. The chair of botany then, Scott Warren, recommended to teach students how to brew beer. So, and that's how I started making beer. So, unfortunately, I can't do that anymore with students, but still doing myself. Another my passion is just to harvest nuts and fruits from the arbor. So you can see here, I'm holding chestnuts from the end of the greens. Every October, I like to collect some chestnuts and collect them. And in the arbor, there's pawpaw, one of the endemic fruits, which I collected with students and made ice creams. Also, I pick up hunting turkeys. In fact, each year I get my turkeys for my Thanksgiving, or also share my students. But my biggest passion is hunting deer, white-tailed deer. And I'm a subsistence hunter. In fact, I consume what I hunt. And every year I get about 5 to 10 deer. Sometimes, well, my record is 11 deer, which is too much. And I give a lot of this meat to friends, including I make jerky for my students and for campus safety too. So, and what I found about hunting is that I was spending a lot of time in the woods, sitting down quietly, and it was very soothing to be really sitting down and paying attention to the environment for up to 10 hours at a time. And in fact, in Japan, they created this tradition of walking in the woods because it's distressing in a way to reduce also depression. So I found out that it's fantastic to go hunting because I can bring my iPad and prepare for my classes, check my phone, and read my emails and respond to my emails to my students while I'm waiting for a deer. And sometimes I'll spend 4 days without seeing no deers, but I've been more connected to my students. Also, this year I decided to start brain tanning deer hides to make my buckskin. That'll be my new skill. So I work on 4 different deers. My other passion is also spear fishing. In fact, in the beaches on New London. So I discovered that during the pandemic, gyms were closed. My gym was not closed because woods and the ocean is open, and I do it by myself alone. So it didn't affect my chances. And I got last year about 50 tautauks to make ceviches, paellas, and different dishes. Also, I made my spear guns. I discovered that the guns in the market were either not great or too expensive. And I found that making my own guns, my spear guns, were better and cheaper. It was a pleasure to shoot my own spear guns. Also, fly fishing is another of my fun things in nature. So here, this is a picture in the Venezuelan mountains, the highlands, looking for lakes very high and catch trouts. Yeah, over the years, I've been cooking a lot of what I've been catching and sharing with my friends. And here, I'm making some cheese kebab with the back strap of deer and the heart while brewing beer. You can see Oscar's behind there. He loved venison too. And over the years, I've been making my own bowls and spoons for my own foods. And I discovered that this is something that I learned from the indigenous peoples in Venezuela. So to make your own stuff is really very empowering. And in fact, it's also very soothing and relaxing to carve a piece of wood into a spoon. And most of my gifts are spoons and spatulas to my friends and my family too. So also over the years being here at college, I started learning about mushrooms. And Eric can talk a lot of mushrooms. But I discovered that it was so soothing to spend 5 hours in the woods collecting up to 25 pounds of mushrooms. And in fact, one day I decided to check my iPhone to see how many steps I did, and I could cover 17,000 steps. And I was lost in the woods. It was really fun. So this spring, I decided to also start roasting coffee out of firewood with a cast iron pot I found in the woods abandoned, and I cleaned it and fixed it. So it was really a pleasure to make my own coffee. And fresh coffee is nothing better than you can drink. But my biggest passion is making bows and arrows. I've been making bows and arrows for 33 years. And the picture on the left is I was doing a demonstration in Mashantuka Piqua Museum. In fact, I've been offering a workshop for the local tribes on making bows. And the photograph on the right is a replica of the Otzi, the Iceman. The 5,000-year-old mummy was found in 91 in northern Italy. And I've been writing books about them. So also this year, I decided to start making more knife out of with the handles out of deer's antlers I found. And it's really a pleasure to be able to work my foods and process deer with my oak knife. Uh, and in fact, I also make plates for cutting the backstrap venison. You can see I use my knife. Also, over the years being here, I've been learning to make paellas. And here's in New London, in a beach near Pico Avenue, with local fish, tautog. And I use also products from my gardens, garlic, onions, bell peppers, tomatoes. And this paella, I call it the paella a la New Londoniana, so it's a local paella, very localized products. In fact, one of my recipes was published in the Harvard Currents by one of my students' mother, who was a writer. So, and she heard about my paella and want to publish it. So, one of the things I want to add is that what makes me very resilient in this pandemic time is that I grew up with indigenous peoples in Venezuela, with the Bari people. These photographs were taken by my father when I was 5 years old. And I lived with them many summers. And when I did my PhD at UC Berkeley, I spent 3 years with the Baris learning about the knowledge of the forest and the uses of plants and animals. And I've been writing about them. In fact, one of my writings was published last year is how monkeys play a major role on reproducing the forest. So in fact, I coined a new word that the forests are primatogenic. Both humans and primates reproduce the forest. And during my life, I traveled to Belize. In this photograph, is showing my students how to use achote onoto, which is a plant, as a dye and paint yourself. In the photograph on the right, I am in Chiapas, in San Cristobal de las Casas, with the Mayans, the Lacandon Mayans. And in fact, through my travels and being with Indian peoples, I was able to communicate with them. In fact, this photograph, this Mayan Lacandon asked me to take a photograph with them. So it's just, I try to be very respectful and not take too many pictures. So that's why I want to show it. But one thing about my travels in the Amazon with the Matsigengas, being in places like Manu Park, where there's still indigenous people who have not been contacted with the outside world. I was able to meet Machigengas who never seen white people, so outsiders. And it was a pleasure to do this work, as well as the Baris, where there's no technology, no radio, no TV, no internet. And sometimes when I was a teenager, so I learned to disconnect myself from the dependency of the media and the global news. Sometimes working with Indian peoples, I realized that the way that they live is really the real ways. And when we are here exposed to so much media, sometimes we're dealing with a world that's not real, except the reality of Black Lives Matters, the brutality of police against black people, as well as the brutality against Asians and people of colors. And I want to add one more thing that makes me so resilient. On the fall of 2019, in December, I almost got kidnapped by cattle rustlers in Venezuela. And I had to run in the woods, in the mountains, trying to avoid being captured by 7 guys, 5 horses and 2 by foot, for 4 days. In fact, I looked at my phone and was covering about 5,000 steps per hour for those 5 days, and I covered 65,000 steps without no water, no food, I'm sorry, some water, a lot of water. It was raining very hard, I was wet, sleeping at freezing temperature times in the mountains, and really looking a way to avoid being captured. And I survived because I was able to know what plants to eat, and what to do. So, and finally, I came out unharmed. So, and in fact, I learned from the experience that the most important thing for us is our family and our friends. It's like we have to really appreciate our friends and family, and these are really important resources to be resilient.